All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark, and today we're going to be talking about Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 7, The Spies. And I think overall this was a good episode. It didn't blow me away, but it got me excited for the finale next week. It moved the story along and introduced a lot of cool things on the broader spectrum of the Star Wars galaxy, which I'm excited to get into. I do have some negatives, and I'll talk about them as I kind of go through the episode. I'm not going to go scene by scene per se, but I'm going to talk about the episode from start to finish and kind of highlight the big moment. And if you hear a dog in the background, I'm watching my roommate's dog, so he is also in the room recording with me. Bentley, you want to say hi? Nope. Okay. Didn't think so. He's playing with his ball. But we start this episode with our favorite New Republic or Reformed New Republic Imperial officer. She gets this message from an Imperial probe droid, so if you need any evidence that the New Republic is completely out of whack, there are probe droids just wandering the capital planet. But we finally see Moff Gideon for the first time this season. I think it lines up almost too coincidentally that he made a big appearance and had a bunch of interviews at Star Wars Celebration talking about the end of the season, and then the week of, he makes his reintroduction to the show. And he's basically getting intel from these New Republic spies he has. I don't know if she's the only one or if he has more, but she's reporting directly to him that the Mandalorians are a bigger issue. They are the ones that took out the pirates, so that kind of confirms that the pirates are involved with the Imperial Remnant fleet and eventually the First Order. And Gideon takes this news that the Mandalorians are working to take back their planet and that this is a big threat to the Empire's plans because a strong Mandalore is a difficult enemy. And that's always been true throughout Star Wars lore, even in the Clone Wars. Both sides were so interested in Mandalore, and the Republic wanted them to be in the Republic. It would make them stronger, but they wanted to stay independent. So I think that was a cool aspect of this, that the Imperial Remnant is very worried about the Mandalorians. And we get our first look at a unified sort of council around the Imperial Remnant fleet, and we learn that this council is called the Shadow Council. And I know they've been discussed and explored in the books, but I haven't read all of the books. I believe it's the Aftermath series. But I always support the books getting their day in live action or animation and solidifying their canon, because I know sometimes books don't get that kind of respect. So I like seeing book lore brought into such a big show like The Mandalorian. And the topic of books really leads me into the next big reveal of this scene, and that is Thrawn. And this remnant is essentially waiting for Thrawn in some capacity to come back and lead them as this new Imperial fleet. And I find this very interesting because there are two new canon Thrawn trilogies. I've read the first one, which talks about his origins in the Imperial fleet, how the Imperials found him, how he worked his way up from basically a cadet all the way up to Grand Admiral, and how he got into favor with Palpatine, essentially because Palpatine was afraid of his empire outside of the Unknown Regions, the Chiss Ascendancy, and Thrawn was trying to keep tabs on the Empire to make sure that they didn't expand outside of the galaxy and start to impede on Chiss space, because the Chiss are already in their own war with another species I forget. And that conflict is explored in the other trilogy, which is Thrawn before he gets picked up by the Empire. So sorry, I know this might be confusing as I talk, but just trying to lay the groundwork here, because Thrawn's obviously going to be a big part of this next piece of Star Wars storytelling. And it's important that they really reference and draw on that new canon book set of trilogies. And to circle back all the way to my first point that I was trying to make here was that this is really interesting because Thrawn was not well liked in the Empire. There was speciesism. It's not racism, but it's speciesism. Essentially, the Empire is made up of all humans because they look down on other species. And Thrawn, being an alien, other high-ranking Imperial officials didn't really respect him, and when he did win, they would always look for ways to find holes in it. They'd be like, oh, well, his casualty count was too high. Oh, his tactics are unorthodox. Tarkin respected him because he got results, and that's why Palpatine also respected him, but I wouldn't say Tarkin was a fan of him. I mean, he essentially picked Krennic's project of the Death Star over Thrawn's new TIE fighter program, and Palpatine kept him close because he and his ascendancy could eventually become an enemy in the future. This is all to say that when Thrawn was taken away by Ezra at the end of Rebels, we don't really know where Thrawn stands within the Empire. He has a meeting with the Emperor right before he leaves for Lothal, and they say, oh, we'll discuss when you get back. He obviously never comes back. So are there secret communications between Thrawn in the unknown regions with Ezra back to the Emperor, and the Emperor's like, you're going to lead the fleet when you come back at some point? Like, that's something we need to explore, whether it's in Ahsoka or maybe it'll be another book trilogy, but I really want to see how they connect the dots, that the timeline of the original trilogy, what happens in there that the Emperor trusts Thrawn with the remnant fleet, or this contingency plan between all these Imperials that don't really like aliens or don't really respect Thrawn are now following a plan from the Emperor that he's going to lead the new remnant fleet. That was a lot of lore, a lot of canon, and I'm sorry if it was jumbled and messy, but I think I got across the point that I wanted to, and I hope for everyone that hasn't read the Thrawn books, you got a little insight into them, maybe inspired you to go read them, because I do think that first trilogy that discusses his rise inside the Empire, it's a really, really good read, and I definitely recommend the trilogy. I think the first one is the strongest. I think the second book is only cool because it's Thrawn and Vader working together while also having flashbacks to Thrawn and Anakin working together. I know that sounds crazy in a vacuum, but you should definitely check it out. And then the last book, I kind of forget what happens. I know Price is in it a lot, and Krennic is in it, I think. I forget. As you could tell, the third book I thought was the weakest because I don't remember it that much. But this does set up a lot for the Ahsoka series to explore. Maybe we'll get even more insight next week. But I like how the scene unfolds with Moff Gideon recognizing that there's a power vacuum, that the other Imperials are getting impatient, waiting for Thrawn, except Thrawn's like right-hand man who's like, no, he's coming. I know, he's going to be here. And it gives us insight into the warring factions within the Empire. Like, all of these people are essentially warlords vying for power. And if they can be the new heir to the Empire, they're going to do that. And Moff Gideon, he has Mandalore, he has this new troop of beskar soldiers, he is studying this force-sensitive cloning, so he's putting together quite the roster. And speaking of cloning, we get introduced to General Hux's father from Force Awakens. We see General Hux's dad here in the Imperial Remnant Council, and he's working on Project Necromancy, which is a huge wink-wink to the Emperor being cloned and brought back to life. So he's working on that. Moff Gideon even says, you're much more into the cloning aspect than I am. I'm sure someone else on this council has been working on Starkiller Base, which we saw in Jedi Fallen Order was Ilum. So I want to see how that comes about, that eventually becomes this huge planet Death Star that can destroy 5 planets at once. But at the end of the scene, Moff Gideon gets his request to have Praetorian guards sent to him, the guards from Last Jedi, and that he needs fighter assistance to essentially wipe out the Mandalorians because they will become a bigger threat if they're allowed to grow again. Which, I mean, they're going to be growing for a while, and I doubt they want any conflict while they're growing, so you could probably just ignore them and you'll be fine. They've been fighting for so long, they'll just stay on their planet. So then we cut to a scene where the Mandalorians are being brought together on Navarro. The fleet looks awesome. Again, the ship designs, the ship visual effects have been incredible this season, and I love that they painted the Mythosaur skull on the bottom of the Imperial cruiser. Very reminiscent of Thrawn's serpent that he has on the bottom of his Star Destroyer. Wink, wink. And we finally get the meeting between the two clans, and you know there's going to be tension. There's kind of a standoff. They start taking off their helmets as almost like a middle finger to them, like, oh, look what we can do. Remember, we can do this. And then the armorer is the great unifier. She comes out, smacks her tools together, and is like, let's eat. Let's have a big feast. So then we have this meal between the Mandalorian clans, but really the covert can't be there eating with them, so they probably left and then came back and watched the other Mandalorians eat because they couldn't take their helmet off in front of people. But it ends with Bo-Katan giving this speech about how we need to come together, we need to rebuild Mandalore, and the plan on how they're going to do that. And that's essentially getting to the Great Forge and reigniting it. So she asked for volunteers to go down to the planet, and we get the usual suspects, all the named characters that we've been introduced to, step up and say, I'll go down, I'll go down. And with that, everyone's kind of on board. There isn't much infighting other than the stare down in the beginning. I know a little bit later in the episode there is, but I wish there were some conflicts at the camp. I feel like that would have been warranted. I know they're following Bo-Katan because she won, and they're just respecting her rule at this point, but I feel like they're emphasizing, oh, this is going to be so hectic. This is going to be really difficult to bring these clans together, but I mean, they kind of come together within the first night. But I guess it was with grit teeth that they were together. So I digress for now. And I forget if this happens before or after that scene, but Grogu essentially is now using IG-11's body as a mech suit now, which I think was pretty cute when they put him in and he started to use the yes-no buttons. And I think that's cool that they acknowledge that he understands language and he does know what yes and no mean, which is a cool way to introduce the concept that he is going to speak very, very soon. Do I think the mech suit is cumbersome, and I don't really see how it's more efficient for him to use than the pod that he's in that has a great little dome and flies around really fast. But it does allow him to interact with the environment a little more. He steals food. I think that's all like good ideas that hopefully will come to fruition next episode, and the suit might become more useful. But I think for a comedic purpose, it was really funny when he was touching the buttons. And there is a big scene later on that he uses the suit for that I'll talk about when I get there. So they go to Mandalore. They have the fleet sitting above the atmosphere, and they need people to go down to scout ahead and look for the Great Forge. So they go down. Again, the ship visual effects this season have been incredible. I love when they go through the clouds and you see from the cockpit, you see the wings shaking from the drag. It makes it so much more immersive than if it was just cutting through the air like butter. So I really enjoy all of the visual effects that go into the ship designs and the atmospheric flying here. But they get down to the ground and they see survivors from the Night of 1,000 Tears. They're on this wind boat, and I guess they just scour the landscape for any livable resources they can find. I think one of them was Skinny Pete from the Breaking Bad universe. I'm not sure, one of Jesse's friends, but I think that was him. I think it was cool that they still had that respect and honor for Bo-Katan, even though she's going to break it in the next scene and tell him what really happened. And that is that she essentially gave up the Darksaber to Moff Gideon for protection from the Empire. That if she gave up the Darksaber, that the Empire would leave her people alone, and she thought that this was the best course of action for Mandalore to keep as many people safe. Obviously, she was betrayed, and she trusted the Empire when she shouldn't have. And that's a lot of weight to bear, and I love the line where she says, "We need to come together as Mandalorians because we're so strong against any other enemy, but we only lose when we're divided." And that's so true of what we've seen in Clone Wars. It was the pacifist versus the old way. In Rebels, it was the different clans and factions that were split up because of the Empire. Some started working for the Empire, others didn't. So, I mean, it rings true, and I like how she verbalized it here. And having gotten that off her chest, she's doubting herself even more. And that's when Din comes in and says, "I've been following you not because you've had the Darksaber. I didn't even care about it. I didn't even want it. I only held it because I apparently won it in a duel." So I think it's an important lesson for Bo-Katan to learn that she doesn't need the Darksaber to have respect and have honor, and people should follow her because they see those qualities in her, not because she holds the Darksaber. And this should hold true for all of the future leaders of Mandalore. They don't need the symbols of Mandalore to be great leaders. They just need to instill that hope and trust and unity between the clans. And then we finally make our way to the Great Forge, and of course, in Mandalorian fashion, we have to have a big, huge monster come out of nowhere and attack the poor Mandalorians and destroy their stuff. I don't really get it. I was just like, why did this have to come down and do this? We just needed to have a big monster in this episode, so that happens. And then they go down into the old city, and they see the Great Forge, which I thought looked really, really cool. And then we see some jetpack people coming our way, and they're like, "Oh, are these survivors that have stayed down here?" And it's like, no, those are Imperials that now have beskar armor. And I think this is a really cool evolution for the Imperials. I think it makes a lot of sense. They've been holding Mandalore. The beskar is here, and they have had time to study the armor of the Mandalorians because they've killed so many. So it would make sense that they would adapt that piece of Mandalorian culture into their warfare tactics. And I think the design of them was really awesome. It's kind of the Death Trooper, but it's in white. But then I also like that it felt close to the Rebels design for the Mandalorians that worked with the Empire to police Mandalore. And we get this beskar shoot-off here where we have them kind of pinned down on a ledge, and there's jetpacks flying everywhere. There's some hand-to-hand combat. And while I think all the choreography was cool, I've had an issue with beskar throughout this entire show, because it's very inconsistent with what we saw in Clone Wars. In Clone Wars, when a Mandalorian got shot in the chest, they died. Same thing in Rebels. But now they've made beskar this invincible shield to all blaster fire. So that inconsistency just doesn't sit right with me. So when I see these battles, I almost find them unentertaining because it's just blaster fire pinging off people, and no one really likes to see two invincible people fight each other. It's not very fun. I do appreciate how the choreography worked with that. I mean, they were shooting like between the armor breaks on the neck. They were stabbing people in the neck. They were shooting people in the back of the legs with his armor. Like, I really liked how they choreographed it, but I really don't like the inconsistencies around beskar as an armor source against blaster fire. And I mean, sometimes it just knocks people over, and sometimes it seems like the people die when they get shot in the chest. So I'm just like, what is a fatal shot here if you're shooting the beskar? I don't know. I've had this issue throughout The Mandalorian, but this is the first time it's plainly obvious because we have two factions that are using beskar shooting each other with blaster fire. So that's the only reason I'm really griping on it. But I really like the next scene where the environment changes around them and you immediately recognize that it's Imperial, but it doesn't register in your head right away. You're like, wait, that looks very Imperial. They turn the corner, they keep walking, and then you realize that the Empire has essentially set up a base on Mandalore. And it makes so much sense because it's almost a hidden base, essentially, because no one's going to Mandalore because they think it's glass. So it's a perfect place to start building up your army, hide your army, and also do research on Mandalore itself without anyone really knowing. So I thought that was a great incorporation of how this remnant is operating under Moff Gideon. Super smart. And we get the old cut the group in half by closing a blast shield door, and we have a bunch of the Imperial beskar troops come down, and then Moff Gideon finally arrives, and he looks great. His suit of armor is now beskar. It's all black. Its helmet kind of is a mix between the First Order and Imperials, but it also has the spikes on his head, like the ones that Gar Saxon had in Clone Wars for Maul, which was really cool. I like that little detail. And yeah, the Mandalorians walked right into a trap. They didn't think that the Empire stayed, but they definitely did. And now Moff Gideon wants to wipe them out. And I like this part of his speech when he says, every culture contributes something. And usually you take that as a positive message. Like, oh, every culture has their customs that everyone should appreciate. But he flips it into a warfare type thing. And he says every culture has something useful in warfare. He said the Jedi, obviously force sensitive. He's trying to clone force sensitives. The Mandalorians, the armor, the culture. So I thought that was a really cool flip. In this scene, we get a nice convenience burger where Din gets captured. And I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, are they actually going to kill Din right here? This would be kind of crazy. They don't. He says we have to debrief him. We have to lock him away, which I don't really know what they're going to get out of him. Maybe he wants to know more about Grogu because he knows the child's still with him. So maybe that's what he's after at the end of the day. That would make sense. But it just felt like one of those scenes where it's like, the bad guy gets the good guy, he can kill the good guy, but because of the plot armor and the convenience, they're like, no, we're just going to take him away. But they kill everyone else. So I get that Mando is a little bit more important than everyone. And this is where things start going south. Moff Gideon essentially tells the TIE Interceptors to go and destroy the Mandalorian fleet. I kind of thought earlier when they kept showing the armor bringing back the injured to the fleet that once she broke the cloud barrier that the whole armada would be under fire by the Empire. That wasn't true, but I still think at this point, like, they kept showing ominous shots of her approaching, and it seemed like everything was going too perfect. It was almost silent. So I think next episode there's going to be a huge space battle up there, and I think that'll be really cool. And the Mandalorians start to escape, and Bo uses the Darksaber to cut a hole in the back wall, and they start going, and then Paz Vizsla is going to give his life here. We saw it all coming when he was standing back and everyone was going through the door. I'm like, yep, he's going to say, you go, this is the way, get to the chopper, and that's exactly what happens. I really think the acting sometimes, the voice acting and the voice helmets is just way too unexpressive. I think Bo-Katan and Katie Sackhoff, just as a voice actor, it helps her so much because she brings that experience in voice acting where you don't have your face to convey these emotions. She sounds great. Even Din sometimes kind of comes off monotone, but that's kind of his character. But Paz, oh my gosh, he's like, get out of here. I will stay. And it doesn't come across cool. It kind of came across like unlifelike. It was devoid of any emotion. And I was like, it's kind of lame. I wish he kind of yelled like, yo guys, go. This is the way. And it didn't really come across like that. But here's another beskar inconsistency. He's shooting the blaster at all the jet troopers, and some of them are falling and dying, others aren't. It's pinging off them, but others it isn't. And he starts going like 1v1, and the other troopers conveniently stop firing at him or don't shoot him in the leg. Like, I wish he got caught in the leg one time, but he just seemed kind of tired. And then the Praetorian Guards come out, and they had a sweet entrance in slow motion, and they skewer him pretty brutally. I mean, they stab him in the collarbone, they stab him in the chest, and I think this is a really cool thing that they've developed a weapon that pierces beskar, that purple weapon that they have. It's not the same one that they have in Last Jedi in the throne room scene, so I think that's a really interesting detail that might come up in the next episode, that these Praetorian Guards are very lethal against Mandalorians. And these ones might have beskar too, but the ones that we see in Last Jedi don't, because Rey and Kylo stabbed them. So these Praetorian Guards might have beskar, but they also might not. I don't know. I think since he ordered them, they don't, but it would be cool if they did have beskar armor. But yeah, we get the sacrifice of Paz Vizsla. His son is now fatherless. Not really very emotional for me. I thought it was, a cool way to go out. I much preferred the Praetorian Guards. I thought that was a sweet part of the scene. And that's where the episode ends. And overall, like I said, I think this was a good episode. I think it had some good moments. I think it introduced a lot of cool concepts around Thrawn and the remnant Imperial fleet that we'll see later in the next episode, hopefully. And then I think a big piece of in Ahsoka, I think they have the work cut out for them to explain all of this stuff and how Thrawn got into this position while not being in the galaxy. But it's not like I don't trust Dave Filoni with that. He's a huge fan of Timothy Zahn and all the books, so I'm sure he will find a good way of piecing it together. I think there are some inconsistencies that I just don't enjoy overall with the beskar, and the fact that the Mandalorians kind of come together very easily, it seems, and the only real dispute they have is over a chess game, which I guess shows how petty it is, but also at the same time, I feel like it should have been more widespread throughout the meal. And the fact that it was Wolf and Paz Vizsla isn't like a surprise. Like, they were going to fight with each other anyway. They were going to fight with anyone that they don't fully agree with, because they're both like always in a dick measuring contest. So I don't think that really conveys like this is the wide-ranging belief of all the people in these two clans. Like, I feel like they should have explored that a bit more. I forgot to mention Grogu breaks them up, which is why that IG-12 structure skeleton kind of was pulled into play, even though I think it would have been cooler if Grogu used the Force to keep them apart. Like, he was so powerful that he could stop two grown men in Mandalorian suits from fighting because he believed in the idea of pacifism and Mandalorians coming together, because he is a foundling. And this is a big Jedi moment for him. I feel like it's his biggest Jedi moment, other than training with Luke, obviously. But it was cool to see him separate everyone and see that this is not worth the fight, and Din watching and being like, I didn't teach him that. I know I forgot to put this where it happened in the episode, but listening back, I was like, I don't think this really fits in here because I already talked over it. So I'm just going to talk about it now. But yeah, I think the IG-11 suit was for that reason, but I think it would have been cooler if Grogu used his Force powers to do it. But I think this episode did what it needed to do as a penultimate episode to this season. It got me excited for the finale. It got me re-engaged in the show after last week's kind of lackluster episode. And I'm looking forward to the carnage next week. I feel like there's going to be a lot. Yeah, we'll see what the armor is up to. But anyways, thank you guys so much for listening. As always, hope you guys have been enjoying the content lately. I've been having a lot of fun making it, whether it's positive or negative about Star Wars. If you want to talk some Star Wars or get updates on the podcast, follow me on Instagram at @star_wars_mark of balance. Love talking Star Wars, obviously, so let's talk Star Wars. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. Peace.